It's Sunday night. You're on the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse, and we're going to spend the next 2 hours together looking at life from a biblical perspective. And as we do each Sunday night, we're going to start with what in the world? What happened this week that might be of interest or value relative to the moral situation, the religious situation, the cultural situation in which we live? Uh, Toward the end of this week, we learned about a former military veteran who, according to news reports, was suffering from PTSD, post traumatic stress disorder. How that he broke up a meeting at the psychiatric facility where he had been receiving treatment out in Northern California, killing the administrator of that facility, killing a medical doctor and a psychiatrist, along with an unidentified man. We don't know who he is or why he was there. He could have been a patient. And aside from the tremendous, senseless loss of human life, you got to ask yourself, what's going on? What happened here? Well, in the short of it, it is partly due to the failure of a system which wants us to believe that something called mental illness is very much like a physical illness and can be treated with either drugs or talk therapy. In this case, it appears both failed, and the patient refused to accept being discharged. And you got to ask yourself, did anybody see this coming? The guy is suffering from PTSD, and you kick him out and say, we're not going to talk to you anymore. I got to believe this was not just a, well, no, Fred, we've come to the end of this program, and if you want to continue, you'll have to go somewhere else. We can't take you any further. No, I think this guy was causing grief. He wasn't making progress, and they stopped the program. They just said, no, don't come back. The popular but largely unknown by those suffering theory is that people are suffering from a mental illness which can be treated but cannot be cured. It's built on the theory that the mind is a cognitive system which can be treated very much like the body. That the mind can be treated with drugs, talk therapy, behavioral modification. That the mind, sometimes mistakenly discussed as the brain, that the mind can be treated, but the mind cannot necessarily be healed. Yeah. We're going to talk about this a little bit later in the program at some length, so you may want to stay tuned. And if you cannot, then watch the websites, because we'll be posting this not just in the audio format, but also as a blog. North Korean Premier Kim Jong-un wants to talk peace, except nobody really believes this. Not yet. According to the Washington Post, Un wants to be seen as Donald Trump's equal, and a meeting apparently will give him that status. According to the Miami Herald, it's easy for Kim Jong-un to talk peace now that victory is almost in his grasp. According to the U.S. News and World Report, Kim wants a peace treaty with the United States, as long as it accedes to Pyongyang's primary goal, which is nuclear weapons, and normalization of relations between Pyongyang and Washington. To this end, North Korea has agreed to impose a moratorium on tests of nuclear weapons and missiles if it holds talks with the United States. He is saying the North also made it clear that it would need to keep its nuclear weapons if military threats against the country are resolved and receives a security guarantee. I said that wrongly. that it would not need to keep the weapons. He went on to say that the North also promised not to use conventional or nuclear weapons against South Korea. But what nobody's talking about, at least not yet, is President Trump's North Korean strategy, which is, don't take Kim seriously. Oh, there is a serious threat in North Korea's nuclear capability, but it's not a credible threat given the controlling influences in the world. Unless the world is completely insane. China's never going to let North Korea have a free hand when it comes to nukes. The United States is never going to let North Korea be a credible threat that way. Russia is never going to let North Korea be a nuclear state. Right now, the world is watching. Not at all certain North Korea can do what they're threatening to do. And the Donald? Well, Trump is chiding. He's insulting. He's intimidating the North Korean regime in what many see as a dangerous tack. But Kim now wants to talk. Who knew? The Trumpster knew. He's been dealing with bullies for 40 years in the construction business, in New York and around the world, dealing with mobsters, vicious people, not nice people. He knows how to do this. We don't have to like it, but it works. Have you heard about China's social credit score? Imagine a social credit system, one where the government decides who could travel or who it is that could live in certain apartments. Imagine if your social credit was too low to send your kids to a private school or to get a better job. Now imagine what kind of behavior would warrant such a score. Well, China is about to answer all of those questions. China now has a pilot program for a social credit system. The government will begin to rate citizens based on how loyal they are to the state. Already, almost 10 million Chinese citizens have been blacklisted. In this workers' paradise, the government has ultimate control over the lives of its citizens because almost everything requires the national ID card. Now, you do know that your driver's license is a national ID card, right? Right? You didn't know that? You've been asleep for the last 10 years. You're not going to get into a courthouse without your driver's license. It's a national ID card. And they're actually taking another step. The ID number assigned to citizens can simply be restricted via computer for whatever the government wants to take away from you. Now, the Chinese media, they refer to the people on this unapproved list as deadbeats. It's a social card. Chinese citizens are going to be rated on their real life and online behavior for things like patriotism, hard work, and avoiding materialism. The system will aggregate all available data, taking into account what books citizens are reading, what products they're buying, and how long they spend playing video games. A bad social credit would eliminate the possibility of starting a business, staying in luxury hotels, or buying or renting property. Not only this, but China will also rely on peer ratings. You know, what other people say about you. It is the ultimate social governance, making citizens police their neighbors. By 2020, adults will have an assigned social credit score in addition to their identity card. Now, you do know there are Americans in the more liberal political camps who see all of this as necessary for you. Human nature, without external control to the contrary, is oriented toward dominating people. Don't know what a bully is? Never saw one? Bullies take a lot of different forms. Some of them are politicians. And the Chinese president is now president for life. In the wake of Mao Zedong's disastrous 27-year rule over the People's Republic of China, his successors pushed through a series of reform measures to ensure that Chinese history would never repeat itself. At the heart of these reforms was a provision that the Chinese state chairman, or in other words, the state leader, could only serve 2 5-year terms. And the system worked. And it worked the way it was supposed to work for 30 years. While China's human rights record remained abysmal, at least the cult of personality that grew around Mao never developed under his successors. Never developed until now. China, according to published reports and their well-choreographed annual parliament, removed the 2-year rule for president in order to allow President Xi Jinping to rule for life. Now, given the importance of China in the world's economy and on the global stage, its slide toward a one-man dictatorship is troubling. It is troubling enough. We don't need anything else. But even more troubling is the kind of dictatorship that Xi seems intent on creating. His subordinates in Chinese media have begun to refer to him as Ling Zhu, a reverential term for leader, not heard since the days of Mao Zedong. The German media translates this Chinese word as Führer. The Communist Party proclaimed Xi as Ling Zhu last October. It was not until late February this year, 2018, in a puff piece on Chinese television where citizens were told that the people's Ling Zhu is loved by the people. You see, the vote in Parliament was never in question. According to the Washington Post, under Xi, China has assumed a more aggressive posture toward its neighbors and the United States. Recently, China came close to a shooting war with India over a remote part of the Himalayas and is trying to turn the South China Sea into a Chinese lake. Keep in mind the artificial islands that China has created. We've talked about them. They don't show up in our media very often. But they have several artificial islands they've put out into the China Sea in order to extend their control of the South China Sea. Islands bristling with military armaments. You see, there is a maritime law, generally speaking, 3 miles from the coast. Well, they've extended their coast. The situation is even more grim for Chinese Christians, as the Washington Post is reporting. Christians in southern China were recently told that, quote, Jesus Christ won't drag you out of poverty or cure your illness, but the Chinese Communist Party will. So take down those pictures of Christ and put up a nice photograph of President Xi. Then there are the hundreds of Confucius Institutes sprinkled around the United States in colleges and universities. Opened on college campuses throughout the United States since 2005, the Confucius Institutes officially identify as research and teaching centers, places where students can learn the Chinese language and culture. These institutes are under the full control of the Chinese Ministry of Education. They can only use Chinese-approved curricula. Teachers are party-approved, meaning they whitewash or ignore facts on politics and human rights, even history, that might be damaging to the nation's image. National Academy of Sciences Rachel Peterson, author of the Confucius Institute's report, illustrates the nature of the centers with a profoundly sad anecdote. She said, quote, the Chinese dictator of one director of one institute told me that if a student asked about Tiananmen Square, she would show a picture and point out the beautiful architecture. It's interesting. According to an annual report from the Federal Trade Commission released just last Thursday, the end of February 2018, it was found that 40% of consumers ages 20 to 29 years of age who made fraud complaints to the Federal Trade Commission lost money. You'd say that's not really news. Well, that's compared to just 18% of those who were age 70 and older. You say, we may be old, but we're cagey, and apparently we're more alert. Young people today are walking through life blind, at least 40% of them. According to the website intellectualtakeout.org, psychologists Stoet and Geary have examined data for 67 countries. They were looking at the differences between men and women in terms of the type job they chose. The implication here is they were trying to find similarities. They noted a large gender gap in what are called STEM professions here in the West, especially in engineering and computer technology. STEM professions are those that involve science, technology, electronics, and math. STEM. Why are they looking at this? Are they looking at the gender differences? Not really. They found mostly that girls were as good as, or often better than, boys at science and math. And in nearly all countries, they would have been capable of college-level math and sciences. They found that girls are good at math and science, but better on average at reading, while boys are better at math and science, but poor at reading. What's more, these snowy utopias of gender equality, Scandinavia, for example, have a bigger gap between boys and girls, with science the boys' best subject. What the authors found was that the countries with the highest gender equality tend to be welfare states. Why? Well, because there is less economic pressure on women in a welfare state. For example, women in the West can pursue whatever they choose. Law, medicine, veterinary science, one science profession, by the way, where there is gender equality. Media, performing arts, becoming event planners, or even child care workers. Why do they choose these things? Because it's what they want to do. It's what they like. And they have the freedom to choose them, even when the choice is less secure or the pay isn't as good. In other words, where women have a choice, they tend not to choose STEM jobs. That it's a choice they are happy with on the whole is borne out by something called a life satisfaction ratings in the various countries. You're not going to hear this on the news here in the United States, where we have a free press. That's some of the things that were happening this week when you were looking the other way. We're going to come back in a little bit and talk about social moral incrementalism at work. Sounds fascinating. We'll see.